As the left side of the aisle tears itself to pieces, the mainstream media is desperate to try to blame it all on Pierre Poilievre. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. We got a lot to get into in this episode, so let's dive right in. We're going to open with the York Regional Police Chief, who had said to everyone, just leave your belongings at the front door and get out of the way. Don't try to take the law into your own hands, I believe is how they put it. Of course, this ties in heavily with the overarching theme of our leadership that we should not be protecting ourselves, that somehow they are going to be swooping in and anything else is somehow not only a threat to their authority, but a violation of the law. And I think that we have to understand that home invasion that happened in Lindsay speaks to more about defending yourself than it is about defending castle doctrine. You have to be able to stand your ground in this country. You have to be able to defend yourself. I mean, that is the only way that we can make sure that there is equality amongst the people. That's the only way that we can make sure that criminals understand that if they're going to go ahead and do this, they're not going to get protected by the government. They're not going to be protected by the police. They're going to, in fact, be persecuted not only by the government and the police, but by the people standing all around them. That is the simplest way to solve the problem. That is the only efficient way to do it. And the government's going to call it take the law into your own hands. But we have to make sure that the government understands this is the law of the land that we're talking about. We want this to be the law of the land, not them telling us what we can and cannot do when it comes to the self-defense of us and our children and our loved ones. Of course, the York Regional Police Chief said that, and then he immediately realized that he was getting a big backlash that probably hurt his feelings, and he came out and said the complete opposite, which is not a good sign in leadership. We don't want a leader that's going to say one thing one minute and one thing the next minute, just depending on whatever way the wind is blowing. This is not how we bring stability to this country, to our lives, to our nation. We have to have leadership that stands firm, like you see on the right side of the aisle. Items can be replaced, but not lives. York Region Police Chief clarified his comments about how to deal with home invaders. After arguing to the public not to take matters into their own hands, quote unquote, when it comes to home intruders following a deadly home invasion in Kleinburg, Ontario, York Regional Police Chief Jim McSween says he understands why some Ontarians took exception to the piece of advice. The advice, clarifying his comments, quote, had nothing to do with politics or with concern over force, close quote. Of course, we understand that when the chief of police comes forward and says to you, don't take the law into your own hands, we know exactly what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, bend over, let the criminals have whatever they want to do. But if I were to break into his house, do you feel like that's the way he would respond? Or if I were to go into his office and just start taking stuff off of his desk, would he feel that way? Or if I was to just walk up to his police car and drive away on it, would he feel that way? Or do you feel like he would utilize every ounce of ability that he has, every little tiny scrap of authority that he has to try and not only get his items back, but to punish you for that outcome? And I think that's the way we have to understand. When the far left says to you, oh, we want to defund the police because it might make a few people's feelings hurt, we have to see that the rest of us are paying the price for that. And we have to see further that when police officers try to play politics, like in the case of the chief of York Region, they flip, they flop, they move. They have no idea how to set policy. And these are supposed to be the people that are in charge of policing. So we have to, as a country and as a culture, decide what it is that we're looking for. Do we want hard, strict, safe society, or do we want a society where everyone can just do whatever they want in any park, in any single solitary house, and all the rest of that? And ask yourself, when you're walking down the street at night, clutching onto your purse because you just got off the bus, what do you want? Do you want to believe that you live in a culture of safety, or do you want to believe that you live in a culture of anybody can do whatever they want, you can't take the law into your own hands? Now we'll take a look at the government trying to force the unions back to work to come into the office 5 days a week, whereas they were only doing it for a few days a week. Of course, it's a big problem for the union, as we can all appreciate. Many of them will have made adjustments in their lives to spend more time with their children, to have less outgoing of expenses, right? And that is obvious by the way that the government says, no, you have to come back to work. Because we know that when you come back to work, you're going to spend more money. It's literally going to cost you more money, and we want that to happen to you. We want you to be spending more money so that you can help us to desperately try to revitalize the economy, which of course is the issue when you elect socialists. They just think that money never ends and that the only way to stimulate the economy is to keep throwing in taxpayers' dollars into the system, which of course is every government employee everywhere. I'm not saying that the government shouldn't be working 5 days a week. I am saying that the reason that they're doing it is not because they are trying to make the lives better for me and you. They're doing it to protect themselves, to try to say, no, we're doing everything we can to revitalize the economy. And as we see, taxation is the only idea that they have. They have no other creative processes that will allow them to stimulate the economy, because to do so would mean that they would have to relinquish many of the controls that they've already implemented. Again, socialism being the problem. Now, Ottawa city workers have been ordered back to work. City of Ottawa employees returning to office 5 days a week starting January 1st, which is typically a time when people are off work from the government, I found that to be a strange day to pick. Nonetheless, order mirrors Ontario government's recent move to end. Now they're trying to, revitalize. Oh, this only happened because of the COVID work from home arrangement. City of Ottawa says all of its employees will be required to work 5 days of work in the office starting in the new year. The city manager announced the move on Tuesday in a memo to Mayor Mark Sutcliffe and the city councillors. The change will take effect on the 1st of January. Of course, this is only the city hall and the associated outlaying, and maybe some of I don't imagine the people that were in the public works office, like the guys that were, that put up the cones and make the signs and cut the grass and all. I don't imagine they were working from home. I would imagine this is simply going to be the administrative people and some associated like that from bureaucratic standards. So they're going to have to be coming into work. And without knowing the size of Ottawa City Hall, though I can appreciate that it probably has a fair amount of employees, it's not the tens of thousands that Doug Ford is ordering back to work, and that Mark Carney is going to have to be forcing back to work any minute now too. I think that you and I need to see that this is a desperate ploy in their mind to stimulate the economy rather than find ways to stimulate the economy. Many of you might be aware that Doug Ford ordered the provincial employees back to work for 4 days a week in October and 5 days a week starting in the new year. And that's a considerable amount of people, and they will be working in areas that are going to be hard hit by having not selling as much lunch and things like that. Like there's going to be a lot of them going into downtown areas of whatever municipality they happen to be stationed in. Unfortunately for Doug Ford, there's a union that's filing a grievance saying that the province failed to provide proper notification. You can't make it up. Union files dispute over Ontario government policy requiring workers back to work in office full time. AMAPCEEO says the province failed to give proper notice about the decision that will end remote work. A union that represents Ontario public servants is taking action against the Doug Ford government after it ordered provincial employees to return to work 4 days a week this fall and 5 days in the next year. Ontario's professional employees, which represents about 16,000 professional, administrative, and supervisory employees, Ontario Public Service, said the province failed to give the union enough notice for its decision. The union filed what it claims to be a policy dispute on Tuesday, alleging the government violated its collective agreement. They probably need 90 days notice, and Doug Ford didn't know any better, because these are the professional people. These are all the managers. These are the people that this union represents, not the front line. This union is what you might call the educated union, the people who are the analysts and all of the managerial level and the top floor of the building. They don't really rub shoulders with the rank and file, except for maybe one or two individuals as they give direction and make a few announcements. These are not the rank and file union members. Who knows what response they're going to have. This, of course, is an interesting fold for Doug Ford, because now we're going to have people coming back to work 4 or 5 days a week, and the individuals that are supposed to be directing them and guiding them and telling them providing them the analysis and sending them in which directions are going to be the ones that are refusing to come back to work. Of course, this really just shines a light on what I've been saying already, that many of these individuals will have made adjustments so that they will spend less money, right, on childcare or on travel or all of the things that go along with going into work 5 days a week. And so they are complaining that Doug Ford didn't give them enough notice. And I'm sure that somewhere in the collective agreement, it's probably, a couple of days short one way or the other. I don't know what they hope to accomplish other than to take Doug Ford and make the government have a court case. I don't understand how they can't just say, okay, you know what, our collective agreement is 90 days, so we will honor your demand, but we will do it November such and such a day, rather than get all mad and get all grumpy and throw tantrums. But I believe that the idea is not to solve the problem. The idea is to interfere and get in the way and thus stall the actual return to work, which will, of course, then keep more money in their pockets and perhaps give them time to make adjustments to their everyday life for small children and returning to school and after school care and all of the things that are probably the concerns. Before we go into some of the announcements that Mark Carney has made and how the far left is losing their mind over Pierre Poilievre, I want to point to some contrasts between Mark Carney's government and Donald Trump's government. Just one main contrast, actually, for this particular episode. Now, the labor force survey is how they keep track of the unemployment level in Canada, and they are essentially revolving around EI. There is a lot of people that are out of work that are not part of this survey. And that's something to fold in, right? When you consider that these are saying 7%, there are a lot of people that are not working that are not included in this number. People hear the term unemployment and they think anyone who's not working. But actually, unemployment to the labor force survey is people who are actually drawing the insurance, the employment insurance. So when you hear that it's at 7%, you must realize now that the number is much larger than that. And there are other factors, but I just, for this episode, I just want to draw something to your attention. The highlights of their report that they released on the 5th of September of 2025. Employment declined by 66,000 jobs in August, largely the result of decline in part-time work, and the employment rate fell 0.2% to 60% of the unemployment rose 0.2%. If you look down a little bit, it says employment falls for the second month in a row. So now, not only is unemployment rising, employment is decreasing. 66,000 jobs they lost in August. 66,000 jobs the country of Canada lost in the month of August. Traditionally the busiest work month of the year because everybody's trying to get everything done by October. When we typically take the winter off, many of the people in Canada who are employed seasonally, which is a big sector in this country because of the winter, they are looking forward to putting in as many hours as they can possibly do. And the economy cannot support them. So 66,000 people have lost their jobs. This is a bad sign. By contrast, I picked this up off X from someone who has no like for the Trump government, right? This just in, another weak job report. Weak, as in not strong. The U.S. economy added only 22,000 jobs in August. That's much weaker than expected. The unemployment rate rose to 4%. It's nearly 8% in Canada. The June job growth was revised down to 13,000. They took off of the actual numbers. In July was revised up slightly by 6,000 jobs. They thought it was 73,000 jobs, but it was actually 79,000 jobs. And in October, they only added 22,000 jobs. Meanwhile, in Canada, we lost 66,000 jobs. 66,000 jobs we lost. And this woman is complaining because the American economy only added 22,000 jobs in August and 79,000 jobs in July. That's the contrast between socialism and capitalism, guys. That's the difference. There you can see a great stark change in how, on the one hand, we have control and socialism, and on the other hand, we have no regulations and we have capitalism. And on one country, they're complaining because only 22,000 people got new jobs. No losses, right? That's up, up, up. And never looking at the fact that in Canada, we lost 3 times as many jobs as they gained. The Liberal government is going to be tearing itself apart, or the far left politicians in this country are going to be tearing themselves apart over the Mark Carney's decision to suspend the EV mandate, which of course goes against all of the ideas that Mark Carney was hoping to have when he wrote his book Values. So that's a real contrast inside of his own stated personal positions, which again is not a good sign in a leader. We don't want somebody that flips and flops back and forth depending on which way the wind is blowing. We need people that are going to create and fix the problems that we have. Now, when Mark Carney made that announcement on the EV mandate, all of the eco-mentalists went crazy and started throwing tantrums, and the Liberals are separating and dividing amongst themselves as we speak. However, in British Columbia, the provincial government weighed in on it. Ontario drove Carney's decision to suspend EV mandate, BC Energy Minister Dix. British Columbia's energy minister said the federal decision to delay its electric vehicle sales mandate largely reflects the circumstances in Ontario, and Ottawa should follow through on a more Canada-wide policy after its review. Adrian Dick says electric vehicles remain in high demand in British Columbia, and any new policy should focus on the main barriers to purchases, such as affordability and improving charging networks, including the places such as Ontario. So you admit that they're expensive and that you have no place to charge them, and you're expecting the government to do something about that right now in the middle of an affordability crisis, in the middle of a housing crisis, in the middle of all of these existential threats that you yourself have been saying against Donald Trump. The government in British Columbia has been railing against Donald Trump almost as bad as Doug Ford and almost as bad as Mark Carney used to do. Now he loves Donald Trump, right? So flipping and flopping, of course, is the position of the far left, because they're not really worried about long-term change or improvement. They're only worried about making you vote for them right now, right? In the short term, they're very short term, right? Very narrow-minded and very short term. And of course, Mark Carney realizing that there's no way in the world he can get the automakers on side, right? That's what matters here, guys, is the manufacturing sector is not going to be participating. The auto dealers that are not going to be participating, those were the people that told him this is not going to happen. And you have one of two choices. You can suspend the mandate, or we are going to shut down the building completely. And that's exactly what we need to see. We need to understand. And further, we need to hear that in British Columbia demanding that the federal government impose restrictions on the EV mandates. Well, they can impose their own provincial-wide EV mandates, no problem at all. Of course, they have the same problem as I mentioned about in Toronto. How are these people supposed to, you see the high rises in Vancouver, how are they supposed to be going underground in their underground parking, plugging in these EV mandates if there's no electricity that's put down into that part of the car, part of the building? Where are they charging up these cars? They go to the grocery store. They put in it. Is it like an old style payphone or one of those washing car wash places? You go in, you put your coin in the machine, you sit, grab your paper, and you let the battery charge up. Is that what we're talking about? Is that the short-sightedness again of this minister from British Columbia, the environment minister from British Columbia? Of course, what we really need to look at, no matter what Mark Carney does, he's going to be making people unhappy. Now, he's not going to win over anybody on our side of the column with saying, oh, there's no EV mandate, because none of us were going to participate in that anyway. But he is going to lose various sectors of his own base, especially those that traditionally would be supporting the NDP, and only threw in with Mark Carney so that they didn't have to throw in with Jagmeet Singh or didn't have to throw in with Pierre Poilievre. And all the while, he's going to be trying to making promises and promises and promises, Mark Carney, and all the while trying to convince you that the government is going to be fixed, while they turn around and fight themselves and turn in on themselves over all of the various contradictions. It's going to be pretty bad for those of us that are just trying to get the problem solved, and those of us that just want to have a good quality of living. We're going to be the only voices of reason inside of the upcoming madness. And hopefully we can convince those people that are always vote the wrong way to think their way through their vote smartly, and we can get down to the business of making money. Well, in the spirit of saving the best for last, we're going to talk about how the CBC is trying to go crazy on Pierre Poilievre because of his position on temporary foreign workers and the lack of comprehension in the position of the Canadian people. Of course, is always manifest by the CBC, because the CBC despises anything that the Conservatives, 42% of the country, stands for. In addition, being the propaganda arm of the Liberal government and not really being in charge of any of their own opinions, being told what to say and when to say it, they are further hampered by that. And Canadian tax dollars should not be supporting this level of, let's call it, divisiveness. Poilievre is playing politics by targeting temporary foreign workers. University of Regina professor says that Pierre Poilievre, the politician, is playing politics by targeting temporary foreign workers who are taking jobs and hampering the economy away from Canadian-born nationals. Wow, what a blinding flash of insight. Call to scrap the program not evidence-based and runs the risk of situation where we demonize newcomers, says this professor. University of Regina professor says Pierre Poilievre's call to scrap the temporary foreign worker program is playing on the sentiments of a growing anti-immigration narrative in the country and is not based on evidence. It's not based on evidence. You believe that people who are out of work should be paying tax dollars to give to individuals to come from other countries and take those low wage jobs. The fact that the under 25-year-old males have had the lowest recorded jobs all summer that they have in the last 25 years. And somehow you believe that that's not politically motivated. You believe that in your mind, Pierre Poilievre is not getting the temperature of the people on the ground. He's just making it up and hoping that people come along. This is the insight of this university professor and some genius at the CBC who decided that this was going to what they were going to put out on the airways at the expense of the Canadian taxpayer, at the expense of these individuals who are actually being harmed, and not just the Canadian born, but it's not like the temporary foreign worker program is doing really well. I mean, we all know that Canada has minimum wages, but we know further that people are being exploited because they don't know that. They don't really understand any of it. And they come here desperate now and they're being taken advantage of. I mean, we all know, we've all heard it. You heard Pierre Poilievre talk about it. And yet here we have this university professor from the University of Regina, a professor, an educated man who is supposed to be so educated that he is able to educate other people, talking about how the leader of the Conservative Party, listening to the people on the ground being upset over the way the temporary foreign workers program is being run in Canada, and how they feel that not only are the tax dollars being wasted, but that the money that could be going to people that are born in Canada is being funneled out of the country, and that the jobs are being given to people who are not invested in being Canadians. And this guy says, how dare he play politics inside of all that politics with economy, with nationalism, with borders. I really hope that this guy's not like a political science major professor, because that would be just like the most ridiculous. Like if I were taking political sciences under this guy, I would want my money back. What he's trying to tell you is that you don't have the right to stand your ground. You don't have the right to pick your position. You don't have the right to criticize the government. That's really what they're hoping that you'll hear from this. That's what all they ever do. They don't care what you're thinking. They don't care what you're feeling. They don't care what you're going through. If you don't agree with them, all they're going to try and do is shame you. That's all they want to do. That's all that's worked for them for the last 5 years. And that's the kind of thing that Canadians need to push back on. That is exactly the type of narrative that is exploiting the situation and allows for the problems to continue. Because then people sit around and start arguing about whether or not you agree with immigration or you don't agree with immigration. What we agree with, what we can all agree on, the 42% of people in this country that supported the Conservative Party, is that we want jobs that are in Canada to go to people that are Canadians. And there's nothing wrong with that. We don't want the government taxes being given to rich businessmen so that they can underpay people that have come here desperately looking for a new way of life. There's a way that we can go about it so that we can give that opportunity to those individuals without having tax dollars being thrown out the window, without having our own Canadian-born individuals being harmed. But of course, we can't see that on the far left, right? This university professor got an opportunity to go on CBC, and he'll basically say whatever you want him to say if he feels that he can get a link put on his Twitter profile or something to that effect. Obviously, it's playing politics, because that's what politicians do. They look after the economy. They look after the people on the ground. Those on the far left that ignore everyone on that complains just tells themselves that they're so much smarter than everybody who's upset about the situation on the ground. That's how we get up into these situations. That's how we arrive at these problems. On the right side of the aisle, they like to listen to what the people want because they believe in governing for the people, not the other way around. But I suppose we can cover that in another video. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.